expectation that participants might open their markets to American goods. They were promising to do nothing less than indirectly subsidize the economy of every country represented at the conference. The delegates quickly agreed, ratifying the terms via signature in the hotel's Gold Room on July 22, 1944. This, however, was exactly what White and the Americans wanted. For no matter how the plan was regarded by the delegates or the rest of the world, it was firmly rooted in the United States' unique strengths, a singular combination of geography, industry, and technological development that constituted the primary source of American power. Over the next year, World War II reached its conclusion. Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan were crushed. American troops guarded Western Europe's borders with the Soviet Empire. While American aid helped get Western Europe back on its feet, it was American markets' absorption of every bolt, table, and car that the Western Europeans could produce that proved to be the determining factor in resuscitating their fortunes. The American economy, never touched by the bombs that devastated Europe, was larger than any that the Europeans had ever had entry to, and the ability to access that market allowed the Europeans to export their way back to affluence. In the early years, the cost levied upon the Americans by the Bretton Woods system was easily managed. Europe was in shambles, and America was economically robust. Accepting European exports without question was only a few notches above charity. But as Europe recovered, the price grew, and that was just the beginning. The Americans didn't limit the deals made at Bretton Woods solely to their allies. The terms of the agreements were steadily expanded to countries not at the conference, to former colonies that became independent, to the defeated Axis powers, and in time to countries that were once pernicious rivals. As more countries signed on, the price of the system continued to grow. As the Cold War ended and entire swaths of the globe changed economic and political orientations, the price grew. And as years turned to decades, the system expanded ever outward until nearly the entire world had acceded to this American guaranteed network. The Bretton Woods agreements are the single most important factor behind the Japanese and Korean miracles, the European Economic Community and its successor, the European Union, the rise of China, and the statistical monster that is the U.S. trade deficit. Why did the Americans buck history and offer this deal rather than take a more direct role in global leadership as the major powers before them had done? How did the Americans get so huge that they could offer such a deal in the first place? Why did the Americans put themselves at such an economic disadvantage in order to offer it? Given that economic disadvantage, why are the Americans still offering this deal 7 decades after the war ended? Finally, just how strong is American commitment to the economically disadvantageous system that makes the contemporary world possible? As unhinged and precarious as Keynes and the other delegates must have felt their world had become by July 1944, it is striking how little has changed in the international system in the decades since. At Bretton Woods, the United States produced about 1/4 of global GDP, about the same proportion as it does in 2014. At Bretton Woods, the United States was responsible for nearly half of global defense outlays, about the same proportion as in 2014. At Bretton Woods, the American military controlled half of global naval tonnage, about the same proportion as it does in 2014. At Bretton Woods, the United States was the only country that for the past 80 years had exited every decade with an economy larger than when it had entered, a record of the modern age that the Americans have since extended to 150 years. Courtesy of the devastation and disruption of World War II, the United States had been catapulted forward to constitute the world's second oldest continuous government, a title it still holds in 2014. At the time of Bretton Woods, the Americans were the only country in the world that hadn't had foreign boots on its soil in over a century, a record it continues to hold to the present day. In 2014, we're not witnessing the beginning of the end of American power, but the end of its beginning. In fact, we're on the cusp of a shift in the international order just as profound as those delegates back in 1944 experienced. The free trade era Bretton Woods created is winding toward an unceremonious end. Impersonal factors beyond our control are not only tearing down the world we think we know, but also haphazardly putting a new one in its place. For now, let us focus on the why of the world as we know it. The premier tool in this regard is geopolitics, the study of how place matters, how rivers lead people to interact differently than mountains, how those differences lead to great variations in wealth, culture, and military strategy. Geopolitics strips away the ideological, the emotional, and the normative, what we want, what we feel, and what we seek, leaving only what is. It all comes down to three geographically based factors. The balance of transport. Successful countries find it easy to move people and goods within their territories. Egypt has the Nile, France has the Seine and Loire, the Roman and Inca empires had the roads. Such easy movement promotes internal trade and development. Trade encourages specialization and moves an economy up the value-added scale, increasing local incomes and generating capital that can be used for everything from building schools and institutions to operating a navy. Such constant interconnections are the most important factors for knitting a people into a nation. Such commonality of interests forms the bedrock of political and cultural unity. Every successful culture in human history has been based on a culture of robust internal economic interactions, and that almost invariably comes from easy transport. Long-term success isn't simply based on economic dynamism. Countries also have to be able to protect themselves. Just as internal trade requires more than a little help from geography, well-rivered plains preferably, so too does defense. Successful countries also have borders that are easy to protect. It does no good to have a great internal trading network if the next country over can park its tanks on your lawn. Deserts or mountains are good for such border zones. Oceans are better. It is this balance, easy transport within, difficult transport beyond, that is the magic ingredient for success. The second factor is the ability of a country to benefit from the package of technologies known as deep water navigation, including everything from easily portable compasses to cannon. In many ways, deep water navigation is simply a gross extension of the balance of transport. It adds a series of technologies that allow sailors to know where they are when they lose sight of land, as well as ensuring sufficient engineering robustness so that cargoes and crews can make it safely to their destination despite challenges, natural and man-made. Economically, deep-water navigation allows countries to extend their local economies to the global level, radically increasing wealth opportunities. Militarily, countries that can operate on the deep blue sea can keep security threats far from their shores. Third, there is the package of technologies known as industrialization. Assembly lines, interchangeable parts, steam power, and the like. If deep-water navigation extended the balance of transport to a global scale, then industrialization put it on steroids. Industrialization is about using machinery both to increase worker productivity and to marry production to higher output forms of energy like coal and oil, as opposed to wind and water. These changes increase economic output by an order of magnitude or more. Courtesy of industrialization, vast portions of the planet that had been chronically stuck in a technological dark age suddenly became capable of development. Such is the ultimate cause of the rise of countries like Brazil, Russia, and India. In all three cases, the balance of transport, deep-water navigation, and industrialization, the United States enjoys the physical geography most favorable to their application. Two facts stand out. First, since the root of American power is geographic and not the result of any particular plan or ideology, American power is incidental, even accidental. Second, the United States wasn't the point of origin for any of the respective technologies that created the modern world. Consequently, we need to turn to other countries and other times to show how and why these three factors arose, took on importance,